The air was thick with the scent of scorched metal and acrid smoke as Captain Cade Draven pushed through the battlefield. The cries of the wounded and the ominous thrum of enemy drones filled his ears. He didn't have time to think, only to act. A soldier's duty wasn't to question fate, only to fulfill orders. And his current orders were simple: extract survivors from the crumbling ruins of New Vega City before the enemy bombardment erased it from existence. His combat suit glowed faintly in the dust-filled air, enhanced with the latest neural interfaces that synchronized with his movements. Cade was known for his unyielding precision, his calm under pressure. But even he had a bad feeling about this mission. The Syndicate forces were advancing faster than predicted, and the evacuation zone was already under siege. As he maneuvered through the wreckage, his HUD blinked red, signaling a faint life signature nearby. He cursed under his breath. Every moment spent here was a risk, but abandoning someone wasn't in his nature. Cade followed the signal and found her. An unconscious woman half buried beneath the rubble of a collapsed building. Her face was smudged with soot, her dark hair matted, but even in her battered state, there was something striking about her presence. He didn't recognize her uniform or insignia. Civilian? Spy? Syndicate deserter? It didn't matter now. "Hang on," Cade muttered, more to himself than to her. He activated his exosuit servos and lifted the debris with a grunt, careful not to crush her under the shifting weight. As he worked, a low whirring sound caught his attention. Enemy drones closing in. "Fantastic," he hissed. Scooping her up, he secured her limp form against his chest and sprinted for cover. The drones rained fire down on his position, but Cade's reflexes and enhanced gear kept them alive. Somehow, he managed to reach the extraction point just as the final transport ship was preparing to take off. He handed her over to the medics and tried not to think about her as the ship ascended into the atmosphere. But her face lingered in his mind, haunting him in a way no battlefield loss ever had. When she woke up, everything was a blur. Her name was Elira, and for a moment, she didn't know where she was. The sterile white walls of the medical bay and the hum of a starship engine brought her back to reality. She had been rescued, but by whom? Her thoughts were interrupted as the door hissed open, and he stepped in. His sharp blue eyes scanned her like a tactical assessment, but there was something softer beneath the soldier's stoicism. "You're awake?" he said, his voice low and calm. Elira studied him for a moment. "You saved me." "Don't read too much into it," Cade replied gruffly. "It's my job." But Elira smiled faintly, her gaze unwavering. "Even so, I owe you my life." Cade didn't respond, but something in her voice unsettled him. He didn't understand why her words felt heavier than they should, as if they carried a weight he couldn't yet comprehend. Days turned into weeks as the war raged on. Elira remained aboard the military vessel, recovering from her injuries. Cade tried to keep his distance, but fate seemed determined to throw them together. She wasn't just a survivor, she was a mystery. Her knowledge of syndicate strategies and covert operations was uncanny, and her ability to navigate political nuances suggested she was far more than the civilian she claimed to be. "I need to know the truth," Cade demanded one night as they stood on the observation deck, staring out at the void of space. Elira hesitated, her expression guarded. "The truth is complicated. Try me," she sighed, the weight of her secrets pressing down on her. "I was running from the Syndicate. They weren't just hunting me. They were hunting what I represent. What I carry." Cade's jaw tightened. "And what's that?" Elira stepped closer, her voice barely above a whisper. "Hope. For the galaxy. For freedom." As the weeks passed, Cade found himself drawn to her in ways he couldn't explain. Her courage, her intelligence, her fire, they all captivated him. He told himself it was just the circumstances, the adrenaline of war. But deep down, he knew it was more than that. Their bond grew stronger with every battle they fought side by side. Elira proved herself in combat, her tactical mind and unwavering resolve saving countless lives. She wasn't just someone to protect. She was an equal, a partner. But with every victory came new dangers. The Syndicate's forces were relentless, and it became clear that Elira was their primary target. "I can't keep doing this," Cade said one night as they huddled in a makeshift bunker. "Every time I save you, It feels like I'm risking the entire mission." Elira met his gaze, her eyes fierce. "I never asked you to save me, Cade, but you did. And now we're in this together." He couldn't argue with that. It wasn't until the final battle that Cade realized the full extent of her importance. The Syndicate's leader, a ruthless tyrant known as Sovereign Malvec, revealed the truth in a broadcast that echoed across the galaxy. "Citizens of the stars, you fight in vain. The woman you protect, the one they call Elira, is not just a fugitive. She is the last heir to the Celestian dynasty, the true ruler of the galaxy. And I will stop at nothing to ensure her bloodline ends here." Cade's heart stopped. Elira was royalty, a queen, and he had been the one to save her. "Why didn't you tell me?" he demanded. "Would you have treated me the same if I had?" she countered. He didn't have an answer. The final battle was a blur of chaos and fire. Cade and Elira fought side by side, their connection unshakable. When the dust settled, the Syndicate was defeated, and Elira stood before the galaxy as its rightful queen. But her gaze wasn't on the throne. It was on Cade. "You saved me," she said softly. "Not just my life, but my purpose. My future." Cade shook his head. "You saved yourself. I just helped." Elira smiled, her eyes shining. "Then stay by my side. Help me build a future worth fighting for." And in that moment, Cade knew his duty wasn't over. It had just begun. Together, they would forge a new destiny for the galaxy. One built on hope, courage, and the love that had grown between them against all odds. Cade wasn't one for grand speeches or royal courts, yet he found himself standing beside Elira as she addressed the galaxy. The broadcast spanned across star systems, carried by the newly liberated networks. Her voice was steady, commanding, and filled with a passion that ignited hope in billions. "To every soul who has suffered under the Syndicate's reign, to every soldier who has fought for freedom, and to every being who dreams of a better tomorrow, we are united now. Together, we will rebuild the galaxy, not as rulers and subjects, but as equals. This is not just my destiny, it is ours." The cheers that erupted from the crowd on the capital world echoed even in Cade's ears aboard the ship. Yet, amid the celebration, he felt the heavy weight of uncertainty pressing down on him. Elira turned to him after the speech, her radiant presence momentarily dimmed by weariness. "Do you think they'll follow me, Cade? Do you think I can do this?" He hesitated. Honesty had always been his way. "They believe in you, and so do I. But this fight isn't over. There are still Syndicate loyalists out there, waiting to strike." Her eyes searched his face, and in that moment, Cade realized how vulnerable she was. Beneath the queen, the tactician, and the leader was still the woman he had carried from the rubble. The woman who had changed his life in ways he never could have predicted. The galaxy didn't let them rest. Syndicate remnants banded together, striking from the shadows. Their tactics grew more ruthless, targeting the fragile alliances Elira was working so hard to forge. The attacks weren't just on military outposts, they were personal. Late one night, as Elira pored over reports in her chamber, Cade entered with grim news. Another hit, this time on Talarian Prime. Thousands dead. Her hands clenched into fists, and for the first time, he saw the crack in her armor. "How many more lives will be lost because of me?" "None of this is your fault," he said, stepping closer. "But it is. I carry the weight of this galaxy on my shoulders. Every death feels like my failure." Cade reached out, his hand brushing hers. "You're not alone in this. You have me. Always." Her eyes met his, and in that moment, the space between them dissolved. The kiss that followed wasn't planned. It was raw, desperate, and full of unspoken emotions. For the first time in months, they allowed themselves to feel something beyond duty and loss. The days that followed were a whirlwind of battles and strategy. Cade became more than her protector. He was her anchor, her confidant, her equal. Together, they led daring missions to root out Syndicate cells, their chemistry on the battlefield unmatched. But the closer they grew, the more dangerous their connection became. Whispers spread among the council. A queen couldn't be seen as vulnerable, they said. A soldier couldn't have her heart. One night, Elira confronted him. "They want me to end this, to push you away." Cade's expression hardened. If that's what you want, say the word. I'll walk away. Her voice broke. It's not what I want. But I can't let my feelings for you jeopardize everything we've built. He stepped closer, his voice firm. What we've built is because of us, Elira. Not in spite of us. Her resolve faltered, and she reached for him, gripping his hand tightly. Then promise me you won't let them take this from us. No matter what happens. I promise, he said, his voice steady. No matter what. Their greatest challenge came when Sovereign Malvec, presumed dead after the Syndicate's fall, re-emerged with a fleet large enough to threaten the entire galactic core. He broadcast a chilling message, his shadowy visage filling every screen. You thought you could destroy me, but I am the storm, and I will cleanse this galaxy of your so-called hope. Elira, you will kneel before me, or I will burn your new empire to the ground. The council was divided. Some advised retreat, others argued for surrender. But Elira stood tall, her voice unwavering. We will not kneel. We will fight. And we will win. Cade was by her side as they prepared for the final confrontation. The fleet they commanded was a patchwork of ships from liberated worlds, a symbol of the unity they had worked so hard to achieve. On the eve of battle, they stood together on the bridge of their flagship, staring out at the stars. If this is it, Cade said, breaking the silence, I need you to know I've never believed in anything the way I believe in you. She turned to him, her eyes shining with a mix of determination and emotion. And I've never trusted anyone the way I trust you. If this is the end, we face it together. The battle was unlike anything they had faced before. Malvec's fleet was massive, but Elira's strategy was bold. Cade led a strike team to infiltrate the enemy flagship, cutting through wave after wave of Syndicate forces. When they finally reached the bridge, Cade and Elira confronted Malvec together. The fight was brutal, but their combined strength and determination proved unstoppable. In the end, it was Elira who struck the final blow, her blade piercing Malvec's chest as she declared, "This galaxy will never bow to tyranny again." As the Syndicate fleet fell into disarray, Cade and Elira stood together on the enemy bridge, their victory hard-won but absolute. The aftermath was bittersweet. The galaxy was free, but the scars of war remained. Elira was hailed as a hero, a queen who had defied impossible odds. And Cade? He remained by her side, not as a soldier or a bodyguard, but as her equal, her partner, her love. Together, they began the arduous task of rebuilding, not just worlds, but hope itself. Their story became legend, a tale of courage, sacrifice, and the unbreakable bond between a soldier and a queen who had dared to dream of a better future. And as they looked out at the stars, their hands intertwined, they knew their journey was far from over. The galaxy didn't heal overnight. Liberation from the Syndicate's iron grip left a fractured network of planets, each with its own wounds, its own fears, and its own ambitions. Elira and Cade worked tirelessly to hold the fragile alliances together, their every move scrutinized by allies and enemies alike. The weight of leadership pressed heavily on her shoulders, but Cade was always there, his quiet strength and unflinching loyalty a constant reminder that she wasn't alone. Despite their victories, there were whispers of discontent, pockets of resistance that refused to bow to the Celestian banner. Some claimed Elira's rise was too swift, her intentions too noble to be genuine. Others accused Cade of manipulating her from the shadows, painting him as a soldier turned kingmaker. One such rumor reached their ears during a council meeting on the rebuilt capital of Etheris Prime. A queen who fights beside her lover rather than governing her people is no queen at all. An elder from the Outer Rim spat, his voice dripping with disdain. Cade, who had been silently observing from the back of the chamber, took a step forward. "Careful, elder," he said, his voice calm but laced with warning. "If she hadn't fought beside me, you wouldn't have the luxury of standing here to criticize her." The room fell silent, all eyes on Elira. She raised a hand to stop Cade before he could say more, her tone as measured as ever. "Let them speak," she said, her gaze locking with the elders. "I have nothing to hide, and if my actions bring doubt, then I will answer it not with words, but with deeds." The elder scoffed. "And what deeds will prove a queen's worth?" Another battle? Another war? Elira's voice didn't waver. No. Unity will. Her declaration set the stage for a new mission, one that would test both Elira's diplomacy and Cade's tactical prowess. To solidify the fragile peace, Elira proposed a bold plan. A summit to unite the remaining factions under a single banner. It would take place on Eldrian, a planet known for its ancient ruins and neutral status. But the summit was a risk. It was no secret that the remnants of the Syndicate, and others who sought to exploit the chaos, would see it as an opportunity to strike. This is dangerous, Cade said as they prepared for departure. You're gathering every potential target in one place. If something goes wrong. I know, Elira replied, fastening the ceremonial armor she had come to despise. But if we don't take this chance, the galaxy will tear itself apart. We can't win this war with blades and blasters alone. Cade's hand rested on her shoulder, his touch grounding her. Then I'll make sure nothing goes wrong. The summit began with cautious optimism. Representatives from dozens of systems gathered in the grand halls of Eldrian's ancient citadel, their voices filling the air with debates and demands. Elira moved among them like a seasoned diplomat, her presence commanding yet approachable. Cade stayed close, his sharp eyes scanning the crowd for any sign of trouble. He trusted Elira to handle the politics, but his instincts told him that danger was near. And he was right. On the second day of the summit, just as Elira was delivering her address, the attack came. Explosions rocked the citadel, shattering the ornate glass windows and plunging the chamber into chaos. Syndicate loyalists, disguised as delegates, revealed their weapons and opened fire. Cade moved before he even thought, his combat training kicking in. He grabbed Elira, shielding her with his body as debris rained down around them. "Stay behind me," he barked, his voice cutting through the chaos. "No," Elira said, her tone firm. She pushed past him, drawing the blade she now carried at all times. "We fight together." Cade couldn't help but smirk, even as he shot down an enemy soldier. "Stubborn as ever. Learn from the best," she quipped, her blade flashing as she disarmed an attacker with a precision that made him proud. The battle was brutal, but the loyalists underestimated the resolve of Elira's allies. Representatives who had once been divided stood together, fighting side by side to defend the summit. By the time the dust settled, the attackers had been subdued, and the citadel was secured. As the survivors regrouped, Elira stood before the assembled delegates, her voice ringing with determination. "This is what unity looks like," she said, gesturing to the wounded but resolute crowd. "When we stand together, no enemy can break us. Today, we prove that our differences make us stronger. Let this be the foundation of a new era, a galactic alliance built not on fear, but on trust." The room erupted into applause, and for the first time, Cade saw hope shining in the eyes of those who had once doubted her. That night, as they stood on the citadel's balcony overlooking the ruins, Cade couldn't hide his pride. "You did it," he said, leaning against the stone railing. "We did it," Elira corrected, her hand brushing against his. He turned to her, his expression softening. "You know, you've changed. When I first found you, you were just a woman buried in rubble," she teased. "A force of nature waiting to happen," he finished, a rare smile tugging at his lips. Elira laughed, a sound that felt like the first breath of spring after a long winter. "And you've changed too. You're not just a soldier anymore, Cade. You're so much more than that." Their gazes locked, and in that moment, the weight of the galaxy seemed to fade. For a brief, stolen moment, it was just them, two souls bound by fate, forged in fire, and driven by something far greater than duty. As the stars above them shone brighter than ever, Cade took her hand in his. "Whatever comes next, Elira, I'm with you. Always." And together, they faced the horizon, ready to build a future that no force in the galaxy could ever destroy. The days following the summit solidified Elira's place as the true leader of a united galaxy. The factions, once fractured and distrustful, began working together to rebuild what had been lost. Trade routes reopened, war-torn planets received aid, and hope spread like wildfire. Yet, even as the galaxy healed, danger still lurked in the shadows. Cade remained vigilant. He knew the Syndicate remnants would not give up so easily. Their leaders had been silent since the attack on the summit, but silence often hid the deadliest threats. He spent hours training new recruits, refining strategies, and quietly keeping an eye on Elira. Her safety was his top priority, even as his feelings for her grew deeper than he'd ever thought possible. One evening, as the sun set over Etheris Prime, painting the skies with hues of gold and crimson, Elira found him in the training yard. He was alone, practicing with the blade she had given him after the summit. She watched him for a moment, the fluidity of his movements a reminder of how much he had sacrificed for her, for the galaxy. "You never stop, do you?" she said, her voice soft but teasing. He turned to her, lowering the blade. A faint smile touched his lips. "Someone has to be ready for whatever comes next." She stepped closer, her expression thoughtful. "Do you ever think about what comes next for you, Cade? Beyond all this?" He hesitated, the question catching him off guard. For so long, his life had been defined by duty, first as a soldier, then as her protector. He hadn't allowed himself to think about what might come after. "I don't know," he admitted. "Maybe I've been afraid to." Elira smiled, a warmth in her eyes that made his chest tighten. "You don't have to be afraid. Whatever the future holds, you'll face it the same way you've faced everything else, with courage, loyalty, and that infuriating stubbornness of yours." He chuckled, shaking his head. "I don't think anyone's ever called me inspiring before. You've been my inspiration more times than I can count," she said, her tone serious now. "You're the reason I'm still standing. The reason this galaxy has a chance." Cade looked at her, the weight of her words sinking in. He'd always seen her as the one with the destiny, the one who carried the galaxy's hope. But hearing her speak of him that way made him realize something he hadn't dared to admit to himself. "I think you give me too much credit," he said quietly. "And I think you don't give yourself enough," she countered, stepping closer. "You're more than a soldier, Cade. You're more than a protector. You're everything." Her words hung in the air between them, and for a moment, time seemed to stop. Then, before either of them could think twice, she closed the distance, her hand reaching for his. Their fingers intertwined, and the kiss that followed wasn't born of desperation or fear. It was a promise. As they pulled apart, Cade rested his forehead against hers. "You know this won't be easy," he said, his voice low. Elira smiled. "Nothing worth fighting forever is." Their moment was interrupted by the soft chime of Elira's communicator. She sighed, pulling back to answer it. The voice on the other end was urgent, delivering news that immediately brought them back to reality. A Syndicate fleet had been spotted on the outskirts of the galaxy, gathering strength for what could only be a final, desperate assault. Cade's expression hardened. "I guess our work isn't done yet." Elira nodded, her resolve returning. "Then we finish it. Together." The battle that followed was their greatest challenge yet. The Syndicate fleet was vast, its weapons devastating. But Elira's coalition was stronger, united by the bonds forged in the fires of rebellion. Cade led the ground forces, his tactical brilliance turning the tide in key skirmishes, while Elira commanded the fleet, her strategies bold and unrelenting. In the end, the Syndicate's forces were defeated, their leaders captured or killed. The final blow came when Elira herself led a daring strike on their flagship, confronting the remnants of her enemies face to face. Cade was at her side, just as he always had been, his blade flashing as they fought their way through the ship's corridors. When the battle was over, the galaxy was truly free. The following weeks were a blur of celebrations and rebuilding. Elira was officially crowned as the Queen of the United Galaxy, her leadership solidified not by bloodline or conquest, but by the trust and respect of her people. Cade stood by her side during the coronation, his presence a quiet reminder of the journey they had taken together. As the ceremony ended and the cheers of the crowd echoed through the grand hall, Elira turned to him, her eyes shining. "You know, I've been thinking." "That's always dangerous," he teased, earning a laugh. "I don't want you to just stand by my side as a protector or an advisor," she said, her voice softening. "I want you to be my partner, in every sense of the word." Cade's breath caught, and for a moment, he could only stare at her. Then he smiled, the kind of smile that made her heart race. I think I can live with that. Their journey wasn't over. There would always be challenges, conflicts, and moments of doubt. But together, they were unstoppable. And as they stood on the balcony of the palace that night, gazing out at a galaxy filled with hope and promise, they knew they had forged not just a new era, but a legacy that would endure for generations. For the soldier who had saved her life and the queen who had found her strength in his love, this was only the beginning.